Welcome to the Max Future Weekly Podcast. All Apple talk and no chit chat.
Okay, this is Lex at maxfuture.com, and this is the Apple Podcast, and this is episode 95, and today is October 28th, 2011, and we have a lot of Apple news to cover today, and so let's get to it. We'll also discuss some apps that I've reviewed and taken a look at. So let's get to it. Okay, so one of the more provocative stories or interesting stories that came out this week was in the New York Times by Nick Bilton, who writes the Bits column, which is a technology blog, and he's now based in San Francisco. And he wrote a column which gives a lot of hope to Apple faithful who've been waiting for the Holy Grail. And the Holy Grail is a true Apple TV, not an Apple TV that's just like a little hockey puck-sized device, but a full big screen TV that is made by Apple. And his post comes out, first discussing something that Steve Jobs said in the recent biography by Walter Isaacson. And Steve Jobs is quoted as saying, "I've finally cracked it," when referring to, Apple coming up with a device that could be a true Apple TV. And Bilton claims that he's talked to some people at Apple, he won't say who the sources are, and that Apple's working and has been working for a long time on a true Apple TV, and that it's going to come out eventually, and in 2012 it could come out, and that one of the things that was cracked by Steve Jobs and Apple was how to control the Apple TV, because the thing that people really seem to hate is the remote. And he says in his blog that Siri is going to be the answer, that this voice-controlled function in the iPhone 4S and artificial intelligence would be in a true Apple TV. So this is kind of exciting. Now, this is what Bilton says in his story. He says, the television project has been in the works for some time. I first heard about Apple's television plans over a year ago. He says, at the time, an individual who has knowledge of Apple's prototype supply chains overseas told me they had seen some, quote, large parts floating around, end quote, that belonged to Apple. This person believed that, quote, it looked like the parts could be part of a large Apple television, end quote. Bilton goes on to say, I immediately began snooping around, asking Apple employees and people close to the company if a full-fledged Apple television was in the works. Several people, all speaking on condition of anonymity for obvious reasons, told me that nothing was actively being built, but, and this was a big but, I was told repeatedly that Apple would eventually make a television. Quote, absolutely, it's a guarantee product for Apple, end quote, I was told by one individual. Quote, Steve thinks the industry is totally broken, end quote. So, this is giving people a lot of hope. Bilton predicts that, quote, the company is now close enough that it could announce the product by 2012, releasing it to consumers by 2013. So, this has got a lot of people excited. Okay, so there's been a lot of debate then, regarding whether it's really viable for Apple to come out with a true Apple TV. And this is something that I've discussed for years. And there are some people say it doesn't make sense, that Apple would not enter the true TV market and make a big screen TV for a number of reasons. One reason is that it's a mess, that right now the way, TVs are made and the way that you hook up to get content, whether it's through antennas, whether it's through satellite, whether it's through cable boxes, whether it's through internet, whether it's through cable cards, is a real mess. And other people say that Apple's not going to enter the big TV market because there's no margins. How is it going to make a profit? That there are all these big screen TVs and the price of them keeps falling and falling and falling. And how is Apple going to make a market? Well, I think Apple can enter it, and I think it can make a market. Now, as to the falling prices, remember, Apple has entered other markets where there's been falling prices and has been able to come up with a really astounding product and charge a premium for it. Take the smartphones. Smartphones and cell phone prices have been falling, and they've been sort of, crappy little devices. But Apple came out with the iPhone and is collecting, is charging a lot of money for them. They're subsidized phones by the phone companies, but, the cheapest iPhones really being sold for over $500 and the most expensive iPhone over $800. Now, I think if Apple made a truly elegant, beautiful, pure television product, that people would be willing to pay a premium. They'd be paying a premium for the design and also for the ease of use. And people desperately want ease of use. So the question is, what would that Apple TV look like? Well, it would be very easy for Apple to take the current Apple TV 2, which it looks like a hockey puck, and put it in a big screen TV. So for one, I think it's going to be a big screen TV. It's going to be, most likely Apple will have it, in a couple of sizes. I wouldn't be surprised if Apple has a 42-inch screen TV, a 50-inch screen TV, and a 60-inch screen TV, all at different prices. And not only, will the screens be different sizes, but I bet you that the TVs have different storage options. And Apple's going to put in flash storage. It's not going to put in hard drives because hard drives are slow, and Apple is definitely going to flash drives. I think that's what's in the current Apple TV 2. But the question is Apple also going to allow a connection to that TV for terrestrial, antenna connection, or cable box connection, or cable card connection, or satellite? Now, this is where I'm not so sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if Apple made that like an option, similar to how you can get the iPad either just with Wi-Fi or with Wi-Fi and 3G. So maybe Apple's going to come out with a big screen TV, and at a minimum, it won't have any connections for cable television or satellite television or terrestrial television. It won't have a tuner in it. Rather, it'll just be really a big monitor with an Apple TV software built into it and the ability to hook up to the internet. Now, that type of Apple TV would still be very attractive for a lot of people, particularly if it was beautiful and had the Apple TV integrated into it, because more and more people are using their regular Apple TV to see content from the internet. Now, currently, and a lot of people want to cut the cable cord. A lot of people, including me, don't want to pay the cable company or the satellite company or any sort of traditional cable-like operator hundreds of dollars a month for lousy television. And the key is to have content on this non-cable television. And I think Apple's very close to being there. The current Apple TV has a lot of cool apps on it that give you content. For one, there's the iTunes store, and more you can rent TVs and movies on it that can really substitute for the TVs and movies that are on cable channel. But also you have the Netflix app on it, and that is huge because I think you pay like $8 a month to Netflix, and you get really great movies and TV series. And then you have like the basketball NBA app. I know the NBA is on strike, but when it's not, you can see the NBA, and you also have the baseball app. Now, if Apple can only get the NFL app, right now DirecTV has like an NFL app for the iPad, but you have to have an a DirecTV box and account. But if Apple can get more and more content, it's going to be compelling, and a lot of people will switch and cut their cable, service. Now, one thing that really does already exist is the ability to really have free content on your TV via the Apple TV 2 that through your iPad. Because, one thing people forget is that the iPhone and the iPad 2 can mirror and send any video content via AirPlay wirelessly to the Apple TV, which then connects to a big monitor. And it's amazing because without having an app on the Apple TV, really I am watching on big screen TV a lot of great video content through my iPad. For example, anything I watch on YouTube on the iPad or Netflix can mirror to the big TV through the Apple TV. Similarly, Bloomberg Television just released an app on the iPad that just, without having any sort of, cable box or anything, it just streams Bloomberg News to the iPad, which then streams to the Apple TV. And, for, I guess, over a year, we've had the Al Jazeera TV app, which is the English version of the app. And that's actually a very good international news service. And that can also stream to the Apple TV. And we've seen ABC and NBC release apps that stream to the Apple TV. So, if somebody builds a big TV that has the Apple TV built into it, it's going to be very compelling because we're going to have all these iOS devices, and the iOS devices will stream to the TV. Now, built-in, was saying that, one way to control the Apple TV is with Siri, the voice recognition. And John Gruber was wondering out loud on his blog, like, how would Siri be the end-all answer to controlling your big TV? Because how would Siri know where you're at? And I think the answer for John Gruber is that's because Siri is going to work through your iOS device to the big TV. So think about it. You're going to have, I think there's going to be more and cheaper iOS devices, and maybe one that's like a remote. And so we're going to have maybe a very cheap iPod Touch-like remote that has Siri built into it. So you're going to be able to sort of see what the controls are on this little screen in your hand, but then talk to it and say what you want. So you're going to have both. And I think that's going to be the solution. And I think a lot of the content on the TV is going to come through AirPlay. Or AirPlay is going to also know if there's a companion app on the Apple TV. Instead of streaming it, just trigger the app from the Apple TV. So I do think it's viable. Now, one issue, though, is, if Apple goes to a pure streaming content model, isn't it going to go to war then with the cable companies? Because aren't the cable companies, they're also providing the internet. Couldn't they just throttle the internet? Well, I don't think at the beginning Apple's going to go to total war. Apple doesn't like to do that. Maybe at the beginning Apple's going to sell multiple models, like I said. So there'll be other models that are hooked up to a cable card or a cable box. But Apple's going to take that cable content and organize it better with a better interface and with better DVR function. So I think we're going to see some sort of collaboration between Apple and Time Warner Cable and Comcast and all the big cable companies, where Apple's going to somehow find a way to take that TV feed and turn it into something, better organized on the screen. But I think in the long run, Apple's going to want that streaming content. So the real question is, how is Apple going to battle and defend itself against the cable companies and who provide the internet access? Because if the cable companies keep losing revenue and viewers from subscribing to cable television, are they going to jack up the price of high-speed internet access in the home? So I don't know. I mean, hopefully the technology will change. Maybe Apple will somehow enter the business of providing high-speed internet in people's home. But that's a tough business to enter right now. We're going to need some sort of technological breakthrough. Maybe the next generation of Wi-Fi will be that breakthrough. Because, to some extent, with the cable companies, Apple's at the same mercy that it was with the cell phone carriers. Because when Apple was entering the cell phone world, it had to deal with the fact that the cell phone carriers had a lot of power, because you could not get your device out there unless you could get it to work with one of the cell phone providers. Well, similarly, to some extent, you can't really get your TV out there unless it works with the cable television providers. So I do think it's going to come. I know personally I'd be willing to pay a premium for a really nice 50-inch or 42-inch or 60-inch TV that is designed by Apple, and it has the Apple TV built into it, and that has like an Apple DVR-like function built into it. So I do think built-in is right. I do think we'll see that coming soon. And I think Apple could, all Apple has to do is charge 30% more. And because if it has beautiful design and beautiful function, people would be willing to pay 30% more from what the competitor's TV is charging. So anyways, I'm looking forward to that. Now, for years I have followed Don McAllister, a charming Liverpoolian. I first became aware of Don because sometime in the last decade, he started a business of doing video screencast tutorials of Macintosh apps and operating systems. I consider him to be the king of how to do a screencast tutorial. He has offered some of his tutorials for free, though through iTunes and on his website, screencastsonline.com. And he also has a paid subscription where you can get his full library of useful tutorials. Don is also a regular guest on various Apple-related podcasts, such as Leo Laporte's MacBreak Weekly. So through his excellent screencasts and podcasts appearances, I have also become familiar with Don and how important he is in the Mac and Apple universe. Recently, Don has undertaken a new method to release and sell his video screencast tutorial. Earlier this week, on October 21st, 2011, Don released an application through the Mac App Store. Don gave me a code so I could get a free version of the app for review purposes. The app is called SCOtutor for Lion, and it costs $3.99. This Mac app is essentially a video screencast tutorial on Apple's new Lion operating system for the Macintosh. It basically covers the key new features of Lion. As Lion is a major upgrade from the previous OS X for the Mac, there are some tricky new features, and the SCOtutor app is there to provide users with hand-holding in learning how to use the new features. Here are key stats regarding the SCOtutor for Lion app. It has over 2 hours of video, which cover 12 major topics and has 60 chapters. There are 12 chapters: Introduction to Lion, Gestures in Lion, Full Screen Apps in Lion, Mastering Mission Control, Launchpad, Resume in Lion, Autosave in Lion, Versions in Lion, Using Safari in Lion, Using Mail in Lion, Enhancements to Preview, Address Book in Lion, and iCal in Lion. The subchapters can be very detailed. For example, the Using the Finder chapter has 10 subchapters, each highlighting and explaining key new features in Lion's Finder. Bottom line, Don has a lot of content in here. One of the key strengths of Don's screencast tutorials, which is also present here, is that Don is highly professional, so the videos have no wasted space and everything is edited perfectly. Don doesn't do anything annoying or flashy with callouts or special effects. Rather, Don judiciously uses callouts and highlights to effectively focus the viewer on the lesson. Also, Don's sound editing is great. There are no hisses or pops, and his voice is easy to listen to and matter of fact. Don's narration is strong, as he gets to the heart of the lesson and doesn't use unnecessary verbiage. In addition to learning key features in Lion and how to use them, you are essentially getting a great lesson on how to do a screencast tutorial. So who should get the SCOtutor for Lion app? First, any newbie Macintosh users or Macintosh users with limited skills should definitely get this $3.99 app. It will really help you get the most out of Lion. Lion is filled with cool new features and Don takes you through them. Many are not so obvious that you can just start using them. For example, in the Finder chapter, Don has a subchapter on using AirDrop. AirDrop is this really cool new feature in Lion where you can transfer any file over a common Wi-Fi network to anyone else running Lion on a Macintosh. AirDrop is built into the Finder and you can drag a file into the AirDrop window if you see that AirDrop recognizes another Macintosh on the Wi-Fi network you are on. You can also send it to the other Macintosh and the other Macintosh can choose to receive the file. I use this all the time to transfer my podcast files from my MacBook Air to my iMac after I have finished recording my podcast. As Lion saturates Macintoshes, people will use AirDrop to transfer files to a friend when at a cafe with Wi-Fi or in a school dorm with Wi-Fi. Moreover, businesses with employees on a Wi-Fi network can easily transfer files among employees through this great feature. Now, Don's tutorial takes you through how to find and use this great feature. Sure, Apple explains these new Lion features on its website, but the SCOtutor for Lion app has an in-depth, great explanation. And since it's all in the app, you don't have to have an internet connection. So, if you are traveling and stuck on a plane with no internet, you can spend 2 hours watching this tutorial. And because it has chapters and subchapters, it is easy to stop and try out something you learned in the tutorial. Second, intermediate Macintosh users as well as experienced power Macintosh users could also consider getting this app. While such users may be familiar with Lion and its new features, it's very likely that they are missing out on all the great little features in Lion. I consider myself a power Macintosh user. I've been using a Macintosh at home since I got the first Macintosh that Apple came up with in the 1980s. I still find Don's tutorial online to be highly informative. For example, I learned how to better use the keyboard shortcuts in the Mail app in Lion. I also was reminded to use key new features like the great annotation tools in Preview, which allows you to use speech bubble in photos and documents. The point is, for a mere $4, the SCOtutor for Lion app is a great way to really drill in your mind the great new features in Lion and get you to use them more. Sure, you can read about most of the features on Apple's website, but you might not really get to know all the great little tools Apple gave you unless Don takes you calmly through the features. So for the cost of a cappuccino, it's definitely worth getting this tutorial app. One thought I had as I was reviewing the SCOtutor app was, why did Don McAllister release this Lion tutorial as a Mac app rather than just as a screencast movie through his website or iTunes? He could have still charged $3.99 for the movie. So what features do you get in the app that you wouldn't get if Don released it as a movie? Well, one feature is that while you could have chapters in the movie, you wouldn't have subchapters. Having subchapters as well as chapters really makes it much easier to hone in on the lesson you want to study. Another feature not in the movie function of iTunes or QuickTime is the ability in the SCO app to jump backward or forward in 30-second increments and also have multiple playback speeds. Also, the SCO app supports subtitles in multiple different languages: English, Spanish, Brazilian Portuguese, simplified Chinese, and French, which is coming soon. I don't think you can do that in iTunes. And of course, there's a very comprehensive help menu selection, which wouldn't be something you would get if you just had a movie tutorial in iTunes. But I think going forward, much more could be done by Don McAllister or anyone else thinking of using a Mac app as a vehicle for doing a tutorial. In addition to a movie screencast, each chapter or subchapter could have text pages with still picture illustrations. Even cooler, you could have a tutorial app that gives you a quiz or tests your knowledge at the end of each chapter. I guess if one is using an app as a vehicle, it would be nice seeing more app-like multimedia features. But let's face it, if Don McAllister added more features, he would probably have to raise the price beyond $3.99. At $3.99, you are getting a great value in the SCOtutor for Lion app. So this is what the app looks like when you first launch it. You have a sort of plain linen-like screen, and at the top it says SCOtutor for Lion. When you scroll your pointer down, you get the little video menu, video controller bar. And you can see here you've got the 30-second fast forward and the 30-second go back, and that's handy for just quickly rewinding or fast forwarding through a section you don't want. As you could see, the length of the total video is 2 hours, 16 minutes, and 20 seconds. To the right of that, you've got the different speed settings, 1 time, 1.5 times speed, half speed, 0.75 speed if you really wanted to slow down. And above that, you have your, you can have it take up the whole screen, and you can go back by pressing that button. You can also toggle through the subtitles. You have right now English, Spanish, non-English, Spanish, Portuguese, Chinese, French will soon be added. Let's add English. When you add that, you get a, let's see, you get a, well, you should get the sub. Let's see, there we go. There you go. There's the subtitle, which is kind of cool. So, and then to the left of that, you have, you can select the topics. There are 10 topics. There's 11, including introduction. So you have introduction, subtopic help, then you have gestures in Lion, and there you've got natural scrolling, changes to spotlight, smart, zoom, smart, zoom, and rotate, swipe between pages. Another topic is full screen apps in Line. This is a great feature in Line where all apps can become full screen. Another topic is mastering mission control. Mission control is a great feature. I use it a lot. You can assign different desktops, and you can see Don McAllister spends more time. There's more sub-chapters in that. Launchpad is a topic. Resume in Lion. So he goes into more depth in some of the topics than others. The autosave feature in Lion, versions in Lion. The Finder has the most subtopics. There's 10 altogether. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then using Safari in Line, using Mail in Line. The Mail app gets a lot of chapters and enhancements in Preview, and the address book in Lion and iCal. So what's nice about this is you can just sort of click on a topic and you jump straight to the topic. So let's try that again. If I want to just go to flagging emails, I just click that, and there you go. It takes you to that. Now, what's cool is you can see Don's editing is fantastic. He's very judicious in the call-outs. It's just, I think it's really well done. If you ever want to learn how to do a screencast, you should really just watch how Don does it, because he's so good. I put that on a speed 1.5. Let me put it on regular speed. And let me just give you a taste of what Don sounds like, because his voice is really steady, professional, and good. Okay, so now let's listen to what a little bit of what Don sounds like. So let's go to, I don't know, let's go to a section here, using Mail in Lion.
Mail in Lion has had a radical revamp. in that we have a brand new user interface, and there are some extra features as well. So we'll take you through all the different new features that we have.
So as you can see, he has this really pleasant Liverpoolian accent that's from Liverpool, England. And he's got nice little intro music to chapters, which are his theme. So it's very, very professional. Now, if you go up to the control bar up here, under the drop-down menus, you have services. It works with services, controls, and all the controls are here that are in the video control bar. Jump back 30 seconds. He's got keyboard controls for that. So like shift, arrow. So it's very useful. Okay, so other menu items, you can under view you can toggle the chapter list or show the subtitles, which is using the C or S key. So if I press the C key, there you go. I'm toggling the chapters, and the same if I press the S key, I'm toggling the subtitles. So that's pretty cool. You can also view at 50%, enter full screen, actual size. And then, of course, under Help, you've got the SCOtutor for Line Help, which is very comprehensive. And even if you're offline, you can get it because it's built into the app. So this is a big feature that you wouldn't have if you just had a movie version of the tutorial. So it's got really good documentation in there. So this is definitely a big feature that you wouldn't have if it's a video version. So look, it's it's a very useful utility. So the bottom line is this: the SCOtutor for Line app is a great app to learn the ins and outs of Line's new features. The video tutorial is highly professional and polished. Don is a master at doing screencast tutorials on using software on a Macintosh. You will not be disappointed in getting this app. At a mere $3.99, intermediates and power Mac users as well as beginners should get this app. Beginners in particular should buy this app. After learning Don's lesson, you will probably become at least an intermediate Mac user. On a rating system of 5 stars, 5 being the best, I give the SCOtutor for Line app 5 stars. Here is a link to the SCOtutor for Line app on the Mac App Store. Now, another great app which came out with version 2 in the Mac App Store this week is Pixelmator. And I have Pixelmator. I got it a while ago. It currently sells for $29.99. In October 27th, 2011, the people who make Pixelmator came out with version 2. Now, Pixelmator is basically a cheap photo editing and drawing app. It's very powerful. Some people use it instead of Adobe Photoshop. It's not completely as powerful as Adobe Photoshop, but it's a very cool app. And so what's new in version 2? Well, it has a new look and feel. It has drawing tools and shapes. You have a healing tool, which is content-aware fill. It also has smudge, sponge, burn, dodge, eyedropper, pixel, and red eye tools. And there's a new typing tool. And it has complete Lion support and much more. So it's like a major upgrade. Now, one of the, let me just give you a description of some of the basic stuff it does. It has interface designed for work with images. You have layer-based image editing. You can use over 40 tools for selecting, cropping, painting, retouching, typing, and measuring and navigation. There's over 15 color correction tools, over 150 filters. You can adjust the image size and resolution. You can transform images, layers, or selections using transformation tools. You can fill and stroke images. So it's very powerful. And I have it, and frankly, I'm not going to pay a lot of money for Photoshop from Adobe. I mean, that would cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars. This thing is only $30, and it's a very handsome app. And I'm, very happy with it. It's pretty cool. If you want to do some drawing or some painting or some photo editing, it's very powerful. Some of the reviews are very good. One person who gave it 5 stars, writes, outstanding replacement for Photoshop. I am not a full-time graphic designer, but need to tweak an image from time to time. I always thought Photoshop was overkill for my needs, and some of my other options were utter rubbish from a functionality usability perspective. My search is over. Pixelmator does what I need to do. It's fast, cheap, and not bloated with extra add-ons, and lastly, feature-rich. Thanks, guys and gals, for developing a great product. P.S. Happened to time my purchase perfectly with the release of version 2.0. So overall, it looks like there's a lot of positive feedback here. So you should check it out. It's called Pixelmator, and it's $30, and I like it. Now this week, Apple quietly upgraded the MacBook Pro line. There was no announcement, and they don't even say new on the website. And basically, it bumped up all the models with processor upgrades. And for example, the entry-level 13-inch MacBook Pro now starts off at a speed of 2.4 gigahertz and starts with 500 gigabytes of storage. The 15-inch model tops out at 2.5 gigahertz using a Core i7 CPU and also gets graphic card upgrades. The 17-inch MacBook Pro jumps from AMD's Radeon HD 6750M graphics card to the HD 6770M, and its processor goes from 2.2 gigahertz to 2.4 gigahertz. This is according to thisismynext.com. And so, these are decent upgrades, but like I said, if you go to the store, the MacBook Pro, it doesn't even say new over that, so these are newer upgrades. Now, I'll tell you, I'm still waiting for the time when Apple releases the MacBook Pro with a standard SSD drive, because I'm a huge fan of the SSD drive ever since I put in the second SSD drive into my iMac. And let's take the 15-inch model. If you get that basic one, Apple now, I think it had this before, but you can decide not to get a hard drive and instead put in a 128 gigabyte solid state drive for just $200 more, or for $600 more, get a 256 solid state drive. But the thing is, you can get, I think they're cheaper at Otherworld Computing. So, check them out if you're looking for more horsepower. It's probably worth getting a MacBook Pro. But frankly, I'll tell you, if you like 13-inch as in terms of a size, I'd get the MacBook Air. They're lighter, they're thinner, they're very zippy. And frankly, I think if you have the money, it's better to go with like an iMac as your base station and a MacBook Air, for portability. Now, recently, I've been having problem with my cloud backup storage company called Backblaze. I pay $50 a year, and I like Backblaze, or I did like it, because basically for $50 a year, it gives you unlimited backup online, and including external hard drives. So about a year ago in November, I started Backblaze, and I backed up my internal hard drive, which was a 1 terabyte hard drive, and about, 400 or 500 gigabytes of that was used up. And I also had some content on an external hard drive. And the thing now that's not good about, backing up online is that it takes a long time, because a lot of internet service providers, like I have Time Warner Cable, take forever. It has very low upload speeds of less than 1 megabytes per second. In fact, AT&T in its cell phone service on 3G has faster upload speeds than Time Warner does with the cable. And I'm getting, really fast download speeds from Time Warner, but the upload speeds are under 1 megabytes per second. So it took months and months and months for me to back up 300, 400, 500 gigabytes online. But recently I've been very frustrated with Backblaze because it's been sort of, throttling my processor on my iMac. And then I didn't realize this, but it was creating like a gigantic cache file when it was backing up, and the cache file swamped my SSD drive. But the real kicker is this. About a month ago, I added in an SSD drive, 128 gigabytes, into my iMac. So I have two drives, and I kept my 1 terabyte drive. And I basically migrated my operating system from my 1 terabyte hard drive to this SSD drive. Now, Backblaze is supposed to just allow you to migrate from one computer to another computer and use the same backup online. But it didn't work for me, and Backblaze now wants me to upload everything again. And this got me thinking about, really, do I really need to have this backup online? Apple now has iCloud, and iCloud is somewhat of a backup online. Particularly, I have Apple activated this iTunes Match for developers. It's going to be rolled out for everybody soon, and basically, Apple scans your hard drive and will automatically match if it has music in its store that matches the music on your hard drive. It'll match that, and so you don't have to upload the music. It'll just make it available to you for $25 a year. So anyways, that got me thinking that Apple should really use iCloud to create a complete time machine-like backup. And so this is the post that I wrote. As many Apple product users know, Apple has activated its iCloud service. iCloud, to a large extent, backs up and syncs a lot of your files from iOS and your Lion-enabled Macintosh. Ideally, I would like it to replace my online backup service, Backblaze. Right now, I use Backblaze and pay $50 per month to back up well over 500 gigabytes of files to iCloud. But Backblaze is annoying and kind of a pain. First, unless you go into the Backblaze app and tweak the settings, Backblaze can screw up your Macintosh by taking over your processor functions and creating a gigantic temp swap file on your main hard drive that swamps that drive. Plus, it takes forever to back up my files to the cloud, as my cable company's internet service gives me less than 1 megabytes per second upload speed. Apple is already on its way to obviate my need to use a service like Backblaze. The new iTunes Match service, which will launch soon, and which I have been using because I have a developer's version of iTunes, will obviate the need for you or I to back up our music connection to a third-party backup service like Backblaze, Mozy, or CrashPlan. iTunes Match will essentially back up 25,000 of the songs in your iTunes library, but Apple backups it up in a clever way that, for the most part, doesn't require you to slowly upload all your gigabytes of music. With iTunes Match, Apple scans your music files, and if the music file matches a music file Apple already has in its online store, then that online store music file is made available to you in your iTunes Match account. I recently tested iTunes Match on my humongous music library of something like 25,000 songs. Apple was able to match much more than 80%. The way iTunes Match works is whatever is not matched then gets uploaded to your iTunes Match account. So I only had to upload something like 20% of my music library, as Apple matched the rest. And with newer Macintoshes, you can restore a line from the cloud, that is from Apple's servers, but iCloud is still far from being a full online backup. Many files like movies and third-party app data still can't be backed up to the cloud through Apple. Apple should and probably will implement a solution where you have Time Machine-like backup to iCloud. Let's hope it comes soon. One thing that people have been wondering is, are we going to have history repeat itself? Apple sort of lost out to IBM in the 80s and actually Microsoft, and will that happen again? I've been reading the Steve Jobs biography, and Here's what I think happened back then. Apple lost out in the mid-1980s and 90s for one big reason. IBM, which has historically dominated enterprise computing and equipment, entered the PC business with the first PC. So although Apple was the first popular personal computer, IBM had the muscle to crack the enterprise space. Microsoft went along for the ride and then took over the domination of enterprise because IBM totally goofed and allowed Microsoft to own and license MS-DOS to other manufacturers. IBM didn't think that was a threat, as IBM didn't think that anyone could reverse engineer the IBM PC. VC money poured into a venture called Compaq that reverse engineered the IBM PC. Microsoft provided the operating system MS-DOS, and the clones started pitching their IBM clones to businesses. Once Microsoft had saturated the enterprise with IBM PCs and IBM clones, Apple was screwed in the non-enterprise business. Back then, most people's first use of any computer was at work in the enterprise. Once they became familiar with Microsoft operating systems at work, they wanted the same at home. Remember, back then, Mac operating systems and files were not really compatible with Microsoft PC files. So everyday people purchased PCs or PC clones at home because they wanted something like what they had at work. And also because there was much more software available on the PC. Many consumers forewent the Mac because there was less software, particularly in the gaming area. Now, I wasn't able to convince friends of mine to switch to a Mac until around 2005, when compatibility between the PC and Mac files was no longer a real issue. Now we are seeing the reverse. Consumers are adopting Apple products, i.e. the iPhone and iPad, in mass, and that is putting pressure on enterprise to adopt these products in the workspace. One threat to Apple is really not from Android, but from Microsoft. If enterprise embraces Windows 8 tablets and devices next year, when Windows 8 comes out, that may cause consumers to purchase Windows 8 devices in their personal life. Android is not as much a threat as enterprise is less likely to embrace Android than Apple, but Microsoft is still dominant in many IT departments, and if Windows 8 takes off in the enterprise, that could pose a threat to Apple's iPad and iPhone growth. Now, one thing that I've been itching to get on my iPhone 4S and iPad 2 is a jailbreak, so I can put on apps that Apple won't allow on these devices. And up till now, the jailbreak community has been sort of stymied in getting something jailbroken on iOS 5 on the iPad 2 or iPhone 4S. But word comes out, I guess today, October 28th, that there is a very preliminary iPhone 4S jailbreak achieved. And MacNN.com says about 14 days after launch, the iPhone 4S has been successfully jailbroken, according to a member of the unofficial iPhone dev team, Muscle Nerd. Screenshots depict the phone with root access as well as running Cydia and Siri. The hack is described as very preliminary, though missing huge pieces needed for a public release. Lots of work left, adds Muscle Nerd. So MacNN says that as a consequence, it's unknown when a jailbreak tool will become available. It also says that one possibility, though, is that the dev team will wait until Apple releases its next iOS update. That way it can prevent another, patch by Apple. So, look, I'll tell you, I guess I want it for two main reasons. One, I'd like to do screen recording of my iOS devices so I can demonstrate apps and, how iOS 5 works. That's one thing. And also, I wouldn't mind, jailbreaking my iOS phone, and so I can unlock it and use it overseas, or to create Wi-Fi hotspots using jailbreak apps. There's other cool things. There's this 3G inhibitor which allows you to use FaceTime over 3G. Right now, FaceTime is limited to being used over Wi-Fi. So there are cool things that you can do once you jailbreak your iPhone or iPad. And I hope the jailbreakers, succeed. Now, one word that is commonly used with Apple is that it's a disruptive company and that it disrupts markets. Well, one market that it's disrupted is the gaming market. In particular, Nintendo has suffered a lot by, Apple's entrance into mobile gaming. And word comes out, I guess this is via Cult of Mac, that according to Nintendo, the iPhone games cost Nintendo almost $1 billion. And I guess what happened was that Nintendo announced its quarterly results, and Nintendo said that it expects a net loss of $923 million in the 6 months, which ended September 30th, and predicts $264 million in losses for the complete year, which ends in March 2012. The article goes on to say it's the first loss that the Japanese game maker has posted in over 30 years. And the Nintendo president said games on the iPhone and iPod Touch as well as Android devices allow consumers to walk away from traditional game consoles. And he said earlier this year, feeling the pressure from Apple iOS devices, Nintendo slashed prices for the new 3DS from $249 to $168. So, yeah, I mean, this totally makes sense. Why would you buy a DS, Nintendo DS, when you can get an iPod Touch or play with an iPhone or an iPad? So I think Apple's going to continue to disrupt the gaming market. Okay, so I'm about halfway, or maybe a third of the way through the Steve Jobs, Walter Isaacson biography. And, I knew a lot of the stuff that's in there because I read some other books on Steve Jobs. But there's some stuff that I didn't know. And in particular, I didn't really have a good understanding before of how Steve Jobs got kicked out of Apple in the 1980s. Remember, he founded Apple, it grew and went public, he made a lot of money. He then brought in Scully to be the president of Apple, and then after a year or two, Steve Jobs was thrown out. But the sense that I got is this. What happened was, Steve Jobs, he was the chairman of the board and one of the biggest stockholders, but there were other people who also had big parts of the company and controlled it. Because remember, Apple brought in that guy Markula, Wozniak, and Steve Jobs brought in Markula, who funded the company in 1 year after its creation with about $250,000. So he got a big percentage of Apple, equal to what Steve Jobs and Wozniak had. And then when Apple went public, of course, there were public shareholders and there were other board members, including the legendary venture capitalist Arthur Rock. Now, I think a combination of things resulted in Steve Jobs being sort of pushed out of Apple in the mid-1980s. The first is that, Apple's most successful product up till then had been the Apple II. So going into like 1980, 81, the Apple II was I think the most successful personal computer. But IBM entered into the personal computer market with a sort of rudimentary PC. It had, not that powerful, I guess, a processor, but they were cheap, and IBM really had the inroads into the enterprise. Now, Apple at the time was trying to come out with newer products, and the Apple III was kind of like a dud because it just had a lot of problems. And so Apple was also creating a revolution with the graphical user interface. And there were two projects for the Apple, graphical user interface. One was Lisa, the Lisa project, and then there was the Macintosh project, which Steve was had taken over. Now, Lisa was essentially, the problem with Lisa was that it was too expensive. It was supposed to be like a business personal computer using the graphical user interface, but it It cost a lot of money, and it had a lot of problems. And then the Macintosh, it made a big splash when it came out in 1984 with the commercial and all that. So at the beginning of 1984, it was a big splash. And Steve had brought in and wooed Scully from Pepsi-Cola to sort of, be the president of the company and sort of, help mentor him to be an executive. But, that relationship started souring in like a year and a half, like going into 1985. But remember, also what was going on was Macintosh sales were slowing down, and Apple was sort of in trouble because, the IBM PC was really taking off. Microsoft was really taking off because it was providing the operating system. And so times were sort of tough at Apple. And Steve Jobs was sort of freaking out and being difficult and realized that Scully, was not a product guy and that Scully wasn't going to be good. And he was very difficult. And he started threatening really Scully's leadership, and Jobs lost out in a coup. Basically, the board backed Scully and sent Steve Jobs into exile to sort of just run some development research center. And, his ego was destroyed by this. He was very upset. This was the company he created, and he decided to quit and create another computer company called Nex, and he took some people with him. So, my sense is that that's why he was sort of pushed out of Apple, because Apple was floundering. He was difficult. He brought in this corporate executive, and that corporate executive, at some point couldn't operate as a CEO with Steve Jobs pushing him around. And the board, I guess, had sort of gotten sick of Steve's immaturity. He was really only about 30 years old at that age. And he had really never really totally just run the company, because even in a way, Steve Jobs was kind of lucky at the beginning, because his real genius was recognizing that Wozniak in 1976 had this great motherboard for creating the first personal computer and marketing it and selling it, and really having the company take off in that first year so that it could then get funding from Markula for $250,000 and bring him on board to take it to the next level. And the next level was the Apple II. And so Steve Jobs and Wozniak and Markula really, and then Markula brought in, when he came in, he brought in this guy whose last name was Scott. And, he was the president of the company, and he didn't get along with Steve Jobs. And he was pushed out at some point too. So there was a lot of turmoil. And, so it's a good book to read. I do recommend it. It's fun learning all the little details about Apple's history and what transpired back then in the corporate battles. And it you get a sense of what turned, what events turned Steve Jobs into the man who then turned around Apple and made it the biggest and most valuable public company in the world. So check out the biography. It's very good. Okay, thanks for listening to episode 95 of the Apple Podcast. This is Lex at maxfuture.com. Today is October 28th, 2011. Any positive feedback in the iTunes store would be greatly appreciated, or on YouTube or on Blip TV. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week. This is Lex at Max Future.
This has been a Max Future production.